Welcome to the Montana Innovation Hub. Today we will be discussing how to ace your investor pitch and how to get funding. We are joined by two great guests with intimate knowledge of both sides of this important topic. Particularly at this time in the COVID-19 pandemic and associated economic disruption, we need some additional guidance and additional focus to try to figure out how to move forward in the best possible way. We don't want to make the wrong mistakes. And in the funding world, that's the best you can hope for. We are joined today by Dawn McGee, CEO of GoodWorks Ventures based in Missoula, Montana, and Susan Carstensen, who is a founding partner of Yellowstone Growth Partners in Bozeman. I'm your host, Arnie Sherman. Among many other things I am involved with in Montana, I also host the Can Do Essential Business Lessons podcast series on Montana Public Radio. So welcome, Dawn and Susan. How are you doing today?
Awesome, Arnie.
Good. Susan, you're doing well?
Very good, thank you.
Let me start off by just asking each of you, Dawn first, to tell us a little bit about your organizations. In your case, Dawn, GoodWorks Ventures.
Sure. We have a couple of operations. GoodWorks Ventures has been in place for 14 years, and we like to say we're vegan capital. We invest in impact investing across the state of Montana with people doing change and making good. We're also on the entrepreneurial side of it. We have a company called GoodWorks Evergreen, and we're just in the process about to go raise money ourselves. So some of which I'm going to talk to you about today and something I will duly note when I try to go raise money.
Good. And Susan, you're a founding partner of Yellowstone Growth Partners. What does Yellowstone Growth Partners focus on?
At YGP, it's a little bit different model. We lead with our skills and our experience. We work to identify businesses that we think we can help them grow, 10x over 2 to 3 years. And my two partners and I have a breadth of experience really against all the disciplines in a SaaS technology company. And we'll partner with somebody for, it's been as short as a year to as long as 3 years to really get them to the stage where they don't need us anymore. We say then they're ready to graduate from us. We've helped them build their own team and maybe raise capital, and they're ready to just keep going.
So both of you have slightly different models, but in general, what type of investors are there out there? Dawn?
I would say there's every kind of investor under the sun out there. But if we're talking and focused today on what venture capital looks like, we have a couple of venture capital companies in Montana, the Frontier Angel Fund and Next Frontier Ventures. There's also been other companies that have come to Montana and been investing. You've also got a lot of high net worth individuals who are writing checks out of their own portfolio across the state. And there's everything from equity investors to debt investors and anything you can make up in between. We've seen definitely an expansion in the amount of investment coming into Montana. I'm not sure of the exact numbers, Arnie, but I would say it's probably at least 10 to 20 folds in the last 10 years of what it was 10 years ago.
Yeah, that's very true. I think when I was with Right Now Technologies back in the early 1999, 2000, we probably attracted, kind of two of the largest venture capital rounds from outside Montana into Montana, totaling about $30 million. But if you look at the pace and scope of activity now, it's like I'm involved in 3 different deals that are going on right now with all the types of investors that Dawn mentioned.
So it makes sense for our listeners who are interested in money to basically do their homework and learn about what the appetite is of all the different funds that are out there and the different focuses that the funds have.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Susan.
Yeah, the different investors, they're really tied to kind of the scope and scale and type of business you're in. Frontier Angel Fund, we had a meeting last night and saw 2 companies, and they're really at the early stage investing. Next Frontier Capital is more at the growth acceleration phase, as well as other VCs or PE firms come in at much different time phases. And it's really important when you're thinking about capital to really think about who your right partner is, who the right type of investor is for the type of business you're trying to grow. Because it's a bit of a marriage. You're kind of stuck with them.
Dawn, you were going to say?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the sometimes for new entrepreneurs, the thought is, oh, I'm just going to go raise venture capital to run my company. And I wouldn't say that that's the starting point. The starting point really is, what kind of company do you want to have? Do you want to have a lifestyle business? Do you want to have a high growth business? Where are you in the trajectory of identifying your customer? Have you had any sales? Really trying to figure out what the right roadmap for your company first is in terms of what it wants to do and how you want to do it, and then figuring out what kind of capital aligns with that in the second.
Sure. So once you figure out who you are and who might be the right person to pitch, what are the things that an investor needs to look at before they have a meeting with someone like you?
I think that, so the question is, do you just reach out and cold call somebody if I don't already have a relationship with you? Do you go on LinkedIn and try to find somebody who knows me, who can give you a warm introduction? I think warm introductions are always better than just cold calls. We do get a great number of business pitches coming in regularly, and we always respond, but we don't always meet. Because Montana is such a small state, and because everybody knows pretty much 1 degree of separation from someone else in this state, and we really believe in entrepreneurship, that's why we've been investing for the last 14 years, we will generally take a meeting with just about anybody, because we believe there's the ability to help people think through their business strategy, help them think through their growth strategy, try to help them identify who might be a right capital partner if we're not. So I think Montana is a little bit different in the sense that there's open doors here. In other places, people may be more selective about who they're going to take a meeting with and only meet with somebody who might fit within their portfolio needs. So finding that initial relationship, and then really trying to figure out, assuming you're getting an informational meeting as opposed to necessarily an investment meeting, what it is you need out of that meeting.
Susan?
Yeah, no, I would agree. And Montana's unique in that way, but any entrepreneur should, attend the various, pitch competitions. There's opportunities to meet the various, judges and people around the state. It is really easy to get a warm introduction almost anywhere.
So if someone has a warm introduction, or they've gotten a meeting and they're showing up, what stands out to you? What does a successful pitch look like? What warms your heart? What makes you, initially feel that this is somebody that's worth pursuing?
I like it when the first meeting really is more informational and they're sharing their story. They're talking about their business. They may have some questions or be looking for some advice. That's a better kind of warm, intro meeting for me than if somebody's just calling. But if you are at that phase and you're trying to raise money and you have really thought through that and you have a pitch, go ahead and make it.
Yeah, I think just like Susan, I'm looking for somebody who's really enthusiastic about their business. We all know business is a series of crises, one after the other, and problem solving for the most part. And so if you're not wildly enthusiastic about what you're undertaking and why, and your why as to why you want to do it, that's what I'm really looking for. And then secondarily, I'm always looking for somebody who's actually really thought through what their business model means. And by that, I really rely on somebody having done a pretty detailed Excel pro forma about how it's going to go on paper. And I know there's various thoughts about this. There's people in Silicon Valley who will just fund a great idea. I will never fund just a great idea. I want to see that you've actually thought through some of the mechanisms of how it might play out. I recognize that projections are often pie in the sky and anybody's best imagination. But I always like to say, if you can't imagine it and it works on paper, then it's probably not going to work. So I want to at least see your imagination writ large through an Excel pro forma.
Well, it's important for people seeking money to understand that as an investor, you want to make money, and they have to show you how you're going to make money off of your deal. Unless you're doing it as completely a charitable contribution to a not-for-profit, and I want to get to not-for-profits in a minute, I mean, it's a money making venture for both of you and for anybody who is doing venture funding. So they have to pay attention to that as much as anything. Is this a big enough idea, a unique enough idea? Is there a strong enough narrative with this idea? Is there enough passion by the investor? Is the team good? All those kinds of things you have to convey if you're going to attract attention. I would assume that's the sort of the model of what you're looking for when someone finally gets in front of you and is to the point where they're trying to make their case.
Right. No, you nailed all the elements in terms of the team and the story and is it a big enough space? Their enthusiasm. Dawn nailed it with the pro forma because they have to have thought through the business and how it all works. I like to say that the most important thing to me is like a coherent story that actually hangs together. And you can't ignore the fact that, any business is a risk. Everybody knows that. And so you might as well, if you're going to pitch, you might as well be cognizant of the risks and be able to address them and how you're going to mitigate them and be upfront, because it really is, it's not, anytime you're raising money, it isn't just a one and done, it's not like you're selling a car that you're never going to see the purchaser again. It really is a partnership. And so there's got to be ways for both sides to make money and be aligned on their interests going forward.
I mentioned earlier a little bit about not-for-profits. I mean, we have more not-for-profits in Montana per capita than pretty much anywhere. And they're always out there looking for money. Are there not-for-profit agencies with new ideas or new projects they want to implement or new directions they want to move in that make sense for venture funding? Dawn?
For venture funding, I'm going to put the venture part in a box and move it to the side.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say for funding, absolutely. There's a lot of housing projects going across. As you were both aware, affordable housing has gone insane in the state lately. So the people who are housing advocates are putting together some great projects, and there's always an opportunity to invest in housing. It's not going to generate a venture rate of return, but it's going to generate a pretty solid asset-backed return. A number of nonprofits have program-related investment opportunities where PRIs are generally less than a market return, often between 0 and to 6% is what a PRI is targeting. And those are investment opportunities that sit side by side with a nonprofit organization. For example, there's a company here in Missoula, Recycle Works. They took program-related investment money from our foundation this year to purchase the equipment to recycle glass, which we didn't have in our community before. So there are opportunities to invest. I wouldn't say that they're venture returned.
Mm-hmm. Susan?
Dawn's closer to this space than I am.
Sure. So what is the most, or what are some of the common mistakes an entrepreneur or a small business person makes when they pitch their business to you? You're sitting across the table, they're telling their story. What makes you kind of cringe, or what makes you say they need to, this is the money version of The Voice. You're not going to turn your chair around. What keeps you from turning your chair around?
I think for me, the biggest thing is you get somebody who has gotten so low on their cash balance, and they're pitching you and they're like, oh, I just need like $20,000 or $50,000 and I'm going to create this, $1 million worth of value. And it's like, it's never going to be that much. And if you're constantly going out looking for little chunks of money, you really can't spend the time on the business itself. And so, there's an art to it, but it's like they need to be raising enough money to actually reach a set of milestones or get somewhere, and not just be constantly back kitchen.
I totally second what Susan just said there, which is give yourself enough money that's going to get your runway long enough so that you'll actually have some flight velocity with your company. The second thing I think that entrepreneurs tend to believe is that they're going to magically create business with no marketing budget whatsoever. So you'll see companies that come in with a set of projections that they're growing from say $25,000 of revenue this year, identifying the fact they've already got customers, but they're going to get to $1 million worth of customers next year, and they're going to do that with maybe a $5,000 marketing budget. So I think really making sure that your sales and marketing budget are aligned with how you're going to do your customer attraction and to actually spend, and looking at your customer retention and churn, those things are all pretty, I think sometimes entrepreneurs miss the boat on that part.
Right. I want to add to that also that I've seen when I'm on the funding side of things. Somebody comes in and if their boat's sinking and they're looking for money just to keep themselves, you're the last ditch possibility for them. And if they don't get 50,000 by the end of the month, they can't succeed. And you don't want to be there putting out a 9-alarm fire. So as you're looking at a business plan, you're talking with an entrepreneur about funding. How important is an exit strategy in your business plan?
I think the exit strategy is important because it influences what you're doing and how you're doing it, and how have you thought through the market, and are there some like medical products companies. I mean, they're great startup businesses. There's a normal point at which the bigger players come in and buy them out, and you should be aware of that and kind of know how that works. If there's nobody who could ever buy you or be an acquirer, why would anybody invest? It just isn't that type of business.
Doesn't that kind of work against the energy and the enthusiasm and the commitment of like the founder syndrome? This is their baby, and the thought of giving it away or selling it or leaving it is beyond their scope of comprehension. Dawn?
Well, I think part of the understanding of who you're asking to invest in you is really important. If you're asking a professional investor to invest, you have to recognize they're generally investing other people's money. They generally have a financial return profile they promise their investor class, and they have a definitive timeline by which they promised it, usually in the next 4 or 5, outside maximum 10 years. So if you're going to take money from a traditional VC, you better darn well understand that puts you essentially on this rocket ship, and you're not going to have a lifestyle business. You, by definition of the terms of that money, will be on this really, really fast, intense growth period ride until that there is an exit by either selling or IPOing or doing something like that. I think one of the overlooked places that people sometimes forget to get dollars is a lot of the large publicly traded companies have venture investing arms within them. And trying to find an aligned investor earlier as opposed to later can help you really kind of get some early dollars in, but also then they become the natural acquirer in your space. And so recognizing who you might be signing up to ride along with in that way can be useful. But if you don't want to sell your company and you're able to take on debt financing without violating your bank covenants, that's generally the way that you keep control of your company and decision making. But every person who makes an investment, generally speaking, wants a return at some point. And so really being realistic about, does your business cash flow? Can you buy them out over time? Can you set up a preferred equity where you basically just buy them off of your cash flow once they've supported you over time? Or is it going to require a sale? And understanding that before you take a dime of anybody's money is super important.
Right. And Susan, I think it's important to be clear for our listeners who are thinking of getting venture money, of what generally happens when a investor puts money in the company. What are the things? It's not just, here's $150,000, let us know how you're doing a year from now. You take a much more active interest in the company. And what does that generally look like?
Again, it kind of depends on stage and the type of investor, but for a classic VC investor, they're going to want to put enough money to work where they're going to end up owning 10 to 15 to 20% of the company. They're going to acquire, or most likely acquire, board rights. And so you've got a new member on the board of directors. There's various protective provisions they put in place to kind of protect their downside. So it's like, if you're this founder who's been used to calling all the shots and doing everything exactly the way you want, introducing that VC into the mix, it changes everything. You got to get approval to go do more debt. You got to talk through, making some key employee hires, all the different provisions in the term sheet. You definitely have another party at the table for sure.
Plus, you're almost certainly going to have outside financial review of what's going on, by somebody from the the fund. It's going to look at the books, going to maybe appoint a CFO or a part-time auditor to look at things, depending on the size of the company.
Depending on the deal terms, they could require that the company get audited, their financial statements audited. It wouldn't be a typical deal term to say, there's going to be a CFO appointed or something, but it's pretty light. Their board influence will be like, do you have the right team around you? And it probably should include a CFO at some stage.
And I think one of the things people miss is, like, let's just say you've managed to raise $10 million of outside capital and you think, yeehaw, I've got this money in my piggy bank and I'm going to be penurious about how it's being spent and just kind of like continue to like manage your business wisely. You're going to be at an antithesis with a growth investor who's going to want you to spend all that money on marketing and dollars and hiring. And actually, they have every incentive to make you spend as much as possible, so you have to raise another round. Whereas your tendency may be to like sort of manage your business a little bit more cautiously. That's just an inherent tension that generally comes with that kind of money that people often aren't aware of.
Right.
I'll never forget when our first VCs desperately wanted us to put up a billboard for like hiring in the Bay Area. And we're kind of like, we're in Bozeman, Montana. And they're like, oh, but you need to be able to attract talent from the Bay Area. And so put up the billboard, and we looked at the prices and it was like, we're not putting up a billboard.
Mm-hmm. And the devil is always truthfully in the details. I was involved in a company one time and had a person come in and had a business card that I'd never seen before or since. Had his name, and his title was Transactor. That was on his business card. And he said, we've looked at your business from the outside, and we want to either acquire all of it or a large piece of it, and we're going to give you $5 million. And $5 million seemed like an exorbitant amount of money for that. And then when I finally looked at, I said, well, send me a term sheet. Let me take a look at what you're proposing. And we finally took a look at it. Basically, what they were going to invest is $50,000 initially, and the rest of it was going to be earnouts, or it's going to be based on hitting certain criteria, which I would have done anyway. And $50,000 wasn't enough to pique the organization's interest. So I think investors, have those kinds of documents in some cases, and people that are seeking funds have to pay attention to the details, no matter how enthusiastic they are or how needy they are in terms of financing.
It's true.
Let me ask you this: we're in the midst of a COVID-19 pandemic. We have a recession going on. The stock market is finally, I think, beginning to react to that economic disruption caused by COVID-19, both domestically and internationally around the world. Does that change what you're doing now in terms of your investment activities, and if so, how?
It's a crazy time for some companies. The pandemic, and granted, I'm mostly in tech companies, right? The pandemic has been a bit of a tailwind. I always forget which is which, headwind and tailwind, but anyway, it's moving you forward.
Tailwinds.
Yeah, they're getting a bit of a tailwind. Money in this space right now is pretty available, and it's pretty frothy. It's pretty, it's competitive. I'm in the middle of, like I said, 3 different transactions right now.
Dawn?
We've definitely been in touch with all of our portfolio companies, and for some, it has impacted them much, much greater. It's extended their sales cycle, particularly people who are selling into schools or hospitals right now. It's not a good time to be in that market space, and we have some of those in our portfolio. With respect to new investments, we're not really writing new checks at the moment. I'm not going to say we wouldn't, but there's just so much uncertainty. And I think that there's a lot of investors sort of sitting on the sidelines trying to figure out, how do we navigate this and where does it end? And as we're recording this, March seemed scary. All of a sudden now October's getting scarier. Nobody's crystal ball's particularly clear right now. Because of the Fed printing of money, there's a lot out there. So there is investor appetite looking for the right investment. So I wouldn't say that it should preclude you from trying to go and raise money, but I think having an explicit strategy and understanding of how COVID's impacting your business, how it may affect your anything strategy going forward, sales, marketing, distribution, other, is really key.
I'm seeing all the companies also, it's disrupting the way everybody works. And that uncertainty about, will people be returning to the office? Is everything going to be okay remote? And everybody's really focusing on, in the companies that have employees, on kind of retention strategies, because the world is such chaos that everybody's reimagining their lives.
Well, based on that reimagining, this working at home culture that has, bloomed unexpectedly to the extent it has as a result of COVID. Do either of you see that leading to any new type startup ventures now that all these people are working at home and are reimagining how they're going to work in the future and can live wherever they want to live? Is that going to foster, do you think, some new types of businesses that could evolve from this?
Well, I think working moms are being hit tremendously hard, particularly those with younger children under 10. The COVID burden is falling enormously on those moms. So anything connected to mom sanity, childcare, etc., is probably a pretty good business idea right now. and we're not just talking bottles of white wine after work. So I think that that's one opportunity. I think that, how people tend to work is going to be forever transformed from this. Microsoft has said you can work wherever you want to. We don't care if you ever come back to the office. Whether that rings true over time and whether, project teams really are able to work remotely, I think that all of us have Zoom fatigue. Being on this call, we're certainly conducting most of our business through this. And it's made it a lot easier not to have a travel schedule, not to get on an airplane and have to travel, not to have to go to a conference. And I've just heard among my peer group of investors, people really reconsidering the amount of time that they have been spending going to national conferences and the like. And I doubt that any of us will ever return to that level of freneticism again. So I think that there's huge, anytime there's disruption, there's opportunity. How it plays out, it remains to be seen. But yeah, I think that there will be new companies that arise as a result. And look at just how Zoom has done alone, right?
Sure. Susan?
The best example of the childcare company would be a company founded out of Bozeman called My Village.
Yes. And they're doing great work and are needed in a lot more. I think they're still in Montana and Colorado, but they're planning to expand eventually beyond that.
Yep.
I mean, there is something to be said, and I agree with this. You don't have to travel as much as you travel. There was a time in my career I was traveling outside the United States 200 days a year, and that was crazy. But there are some things that you lose when you're not in an office setting. There's also, what I like to call accidental creativity when you pop into somebody's office and you start brainstorming and someone else pops in. You can do some of that on Zoom, but some of it you can't. It just happens as part of that environment. Just like learning online and going to school online is different than being in a campus and being at a university setting and having all those real life experiences. But you brought up an interesting point about women at home, and I wanted to point out, and I think you all know this, that nationally less than 3% of venture funding has gone to businesses with all female founders. Why is that, and what has your experience been related to that?
I've raised an awful lot of money from overwhelmingly male VCs. I'll never forget, actually, Morgan Stanley was pitching me one time, and we're in a meeting, and there's like these 6 guys around the room, and they're all wearing their blue shirts, and it was kind of a play on it, but I was like, man, you're like the blue shirt crowd. The next meeting, they had observed that I had been wearing like a couple purple shirts. So the next meeting, they all came in wearing purple shirts, saying, we want to try and look more like you somehow. And, but, I don't know what the answer is and how you solve for it. I mean, I do feel like in Montana, I think of, Erica Mackey at My Village has been successful. Paige at Audience Awards. I'm working with a female co-founder at Allisant, which is doing an app for managed communities right now. Onyx, the great app company,
Right.
Hired a female CEO, which was fabulous.
Michelle Huey runs Vim and Vigor in Missoula and doing a fantastic job.
Mm-hmm. And so I guess the biggest thing I feel like I can do is show up. Jen Yule has a great comment. It's like you can't be it if you can't see it. And so I show up all over the place, whether I really want to or not. It's like I'm on my 3rd iteration of like Frontier Angels, and I have this whole separate business, and I don't really, didn't say it out loud, I don't really care about that stuff. But I do it just because you need to have more females in the room, encouraging other females to invest, encouraging founders to pitch. And I do a lot with the business schools, and I feel like that's my small piece of trying to help with.
Sure. Dawn?
Yeah, I think it's a couple things. I think sometimes women, just by their nature, because they're caretakers and providing for everyone, may be slightly risk averse in how they present their business. And so they may be also more realistic in their financial projections instead of a straight up hockey stick. My guess is that if you see a set of projections from a woman, that they're going to be able to knock those out of the park, because they're going to underestimate and overperform. But when you're approaching investors, they're looking for that better rate of return. So I think there's some coaching and mentoring opportunities to do with women about like risk taking and what it really means to leverage up a business and to take that next step. I think that women have a harder time asking sometimes, not as every single one of them, but just to actually go do the ask, to get the chutzpah up to go do it. It's sort of like, I know that the political statistics are that women have to be asked 7 or 8 times if they're willing to run for office. And then they eventually will if they keep being asked. And so I think, again, women just getting used to rejection and no's. That's part of like, raising funds anywhere in this day and age. But really sort of like owning their businesses and otherwise. Other than that, I'd say half of our portfolio are women entrepreneurs. So I'm fairly blind to it. I definitely champion my women entrepreneurs whenever I can. I think that there needs to be more opportunity. And I will say that like CNN and other people have done stories on this, and the amount of venture investing in the last 2 years towards women-led funds, we're still like a very tiny small percentage, but that tiny small percentage has grown by at least 100% in the last 2 years. So it is changing, but slowly.
Let me loop back again to the original sort of topic here of how to ace your venture presentation. How do you get funded? So what's the most important part of a presentation that you're sitting there? Is it the strong narrative? Is it, the business plan itself? I mean, if you're going to spend time on, really thinking through the whole thing, what piece jumps out the most for both of you? I mean, what do you tell our listeners about, where to put their time and energy, and what to focus on the most?
I can't say there's any one single thing. It's like you do have to know your business every which way. You have to put together a team. You've got to know your market space. You've got to know your competition. You've got to know your business model at a really tactical level in order to ace your pitch. What I tell people to do is to actually write up the talk track first. Write the story, because you're telling a story, and you need to get somebody who wants to at least learn more. And so make sure the story hangs together, nail your transitions, as opposed to like starting with trying to put together a PowerPoint deck, because you can just spend forever on that. But if you get your talk track right, it's pretty easy to pop in the slides, and then it makes you better at telling the story as well.
Dawn?
Yeah, again, I think every investor is unique, and there are investors who will just fund based on your brazenness, your personality, and your big idea. I don't know many of those in Montana. And failure is emblematic of like you're just on your learning way to success. But again, in our state where there's been so little capital over time, that's really not how you want your first round to go. So trying to put as many guardrails on your business as you can so that you do succeed. Yeah, that's important. But the one that I hear the most is somebody who's either hired out or has somebody on their team that's put together their financial projections. And you've heard from me, I'm really big on this financial projection thing. So if you come to me and I ask you a question about your financial projections and you say, I don't know how that was done because I didn't take ownership of it, I had someone else do it for me, you've lost your credibility there. And I know people sometimes get really afraid of spreadsheets, and I say it's like fifth grade math, and then the numbers always tell a story. Once you're going, they tell an even more amazing story about things that you might want to know and things that you don't want to know. And I regard it kind of as like your lifeblood, your pulse point. And so for an entrepreneur, I didn't go to business school. I don't know key ratios of what you're supposed to be spending for this thing or that thing. That's like business school talk. But I am able to look at a set of numbers and know whether they make sense to me and sense in my belly. And as an entrepreneur, I want those numbers to make sense to you and your belly. And that when you come talk to me, you know that it makes sense in your belly. And once it makes sense to you and your belly, my feeling of solidity when I'm writing a check to you is going to be more solid than it would be if you hadn't done that homework.
It's an important point that you make. And, to even amplify that, the one area where I think even, savvy business people sort of have a hard time dealing with is basically the question of what do I get for my investment? I was at a pitch one time and the guy took out a checkbook and started writing a check, and the check was for $25 million. And he stopped right in the middle of the check. He said, before I write this, what am I getting for this? How much of the company do I get? And the company just stumbled all over it. They weren't prepared to answer the fundamental question, even as a person was writing the check, who had looked at the business plan, who had seen all the stuff. But when it gets down to it, I think for entrepreneurs and businesses, that's probably the hardest part. How much do I need, and what am I willing to give up to get that money into the company? And how do you answer that question, from your perch, from your perspectives?
Well, it goes back a little bit to the business plan and numbers, because it's like you've got to paint a big enough picture that, okay, in 5 years, if I deliver on this kind of stuff, it's like, wait a minute, I'm more than willing to give you 15% of my company because I need that money to get there. And then the pie is so much bigger that we both created so much value. So it all kind of has to fit together. Mm-hmm. And being able to do some of that Excel on the math on, okay, well, if I think I'm here and my goal is to grow it to a $30 million company, looking at what does that mean for all the different parties involved.
I remember when we had one of the economic summits in Montana, Fred Smith from FedEx came and spoke. Yep. Well, arguably one of the most successful companies, in the world. And he relayed a story about when he started FedEx, he was out trying to raise money. And at that time, that was a hard pitch to make. He was going to compete with the United States Postal Service and charge 20 times more. And that was when fax machines were coming out. Everybody thought they could send documents by fax. They wouldn't have to mail things. And he said he got turned down dozens and dozens of times. Finally, somebody was willing to make the investment, but wanted 90% of the company. And he was so committed, he says, to the plan, to the organization, to the vision, to the future, that he said he was willing to give up 90% of the company to get the money in order to move forward. Because if he didn't get the money, it wouldn't matter what his vision was and what his perspective was.
So I would never want to take 90% of somebody's company because I think it so disincentivizes the entrepreneur at the end of the day. Valuations, if you're a startup, like you're going to come in and tell me your company's worth $5 million. So if I invest $1 million, I get 20% of it. And that's all a bunch of hocus pocus. Like it's nonsense. You don't have a single customer. You might never actually execute on anything, but in the long scheme of things, if you have a reasonable, good idea and some projections and a good team, I probably want to leave the bulk of your company with you. I
Right.
want you and your team to have really a substantial amount of ownership so that like when it's Christmas Eve and Thanksgiving Day, you guys are all still working. um,
Well,
and
that's the hard thing to balance. If you say it's worth $20 million and you want $2 million, you got to give up 10% of the company to get that. You have to have a plan that's going to deliver $20 million. And if you're more realistic, if it's not so much hocus pocus, and you say, well, in 2 or 3 years it's only going to be worth $1 million, then the amount of money that you're looking for is going to require a much more substantial stake in the company, and that's the seesaw. I always see it as a seesaw that the investor and the person who is seeking funds have to balance. In the case of both of you, I think that you are willing to lean more towards the side of the investor and help them. You're not into basically trying to get as much of the company as you can get and take control of it. And as you said, Dawn, you'd rather have their team intact running it than you taking it over. But that's not always the case, across the board in the global scheme of the venture world. So I'm glad we have both of you here in Montana with some sense of rationality and fairness.
Yeah. Well, I think where you get the most egregious attempts aren't with like the growth companies in a sense. It's more when you get larger, more mature companies, and perhaps they're almost looking at it from a financial engineering perspective. If I put these 3 companies together, I can cut these amount of costs, and it's a pretty brutal experience going through a restructuring like that. But yeah, I'm glad I'm not in that space.
Let me ask each of you as a last question. What's the single most important piece of advice you can give our listeners who are seeking money? If you had one piece of advice to share based on all your years' experience,
love
I'll ask
what you
Susan to
do.
answer. Well, Dawn, you go first.
Love what you do.
Susan?
I'm back to just make sure you really think about your business and what your longer term objectives are. I mean, I am the most proud of advising this company here in Bozeman who initially thought they were going to raise, some seed funding from one of the funds, and they were looking for my help on, how did they go do that? And we looked at their business and their plan, and they really did just need some bridge financing to get some material parts in the door, because then it really was a cash flow positive business. And I was just like, don't do it at all. and anyway, know what you're doing before you just, it's not a free check ever.
Yeah, and by love what you do, I'll just expound on that.
Sure.
There's some people that are really determined to go out and build a business so that they can flip it and have the money then to like have their freedom. I think that freedom is in the experiences and the joy that you and your team create along the way. And you may not love your day-to-day of everything you have to do as an entrepreneur that's going to grow a company. But I think inherently, if you don't really like the work and you don't like your team and you're just in it for the money, that's not a great idea.
Again, thank you, Dawn. Thank you, Susan, for joining us today. You've been very engaging, enlightening, and energizing. Thanks again.